You ever feel like someone else is driving your emotions? Like one comment, one look, one text, dots, and suddenly you're off track. Angry, frustrated, bothered. Yeah, we've all been there, But here's the truth, percenter. No one gets to control your peace unless you hand them the keys. Today I want to show you something different, not how to never feel anger, because that's not real, but how to own your reactions so deeply, so confidently that no one can rattle your calm. This isn't about ignoring people. It's about leading yourself first. Dive so you can show up stronger, not just for others, but for you. Let's talk about how to build the kind of emotional strength that doesn't crack under pressure and how to never let anyone take your power again. You control the thermostat, not the weather. That means you don't get to choose what other people say, how they act, or whether they show you respect. That's the weather. It changes every day. It's unpredictable, and sometimes it's downright ugly. But the thermostat, that's you. That's your internal setting. That's your choice. How you respond, how you regulate, how you decide to carry yourself no matter what's going on around you. Most people live their lives reacting to the weather. Someone snaps at them. They snap back. Someone cuts them off in traffic. They take it personally and let that ruin the next hour of their day. It's emotional whiplash, and it happens because their thermostat is set to match whatever's going on outside. They've handed over control of their mood, their peace, their presence to someone else's behavior. And here's the truth. When you let someone else dictate how you feel, you've already given them power they didn't earn. Think about the most grounded people you know, the ones who don't get easily rattled, the ones who don't explode in meetings or fire off emotional texts at RAM. What sets them apart isn't that people don't try them. It's that they've decided that their internal temperature stays the same regardless of what someone else brings into the room. That's not passive. That's discipline. That's leadership. When you control the thermostat, you take responsibility for how you show up. You stop blaming other people for your emotional reactions. You stop saying, he made me mad or she ruined my day. Because once you say that, you've confirmed that someone else is pulling the strings, and that's not strength. That's surrender. This doesn't mean you become a robot. It means you become aware. Aware that emotions are signals, not commands. Anger shows up, sure. Frustration rises, absolutely. But when you've trained your thermostat, you notice those emotions without letting them drive the car. You say, here comes the storm, and you hold steady. You don't raise your voice just because someone else did. You don't escalate just because someone's provoking you. You set the tone. You regulate the room by regulating yourself first. Most conflict doesn't come from what was said. It comes from how people reacted to what was said. And once you internalize that, you start approaching life differently. You realize that peace isn't something that happens to you. It's something you protect, something you practice. Something you choose. People will bring all kinds of weather into your life. Bad moods, criticism, sarcasm, disrespect. That's inevitable. But just because it's raining outside doesn't mean you have to be soaked. You can stay dry, grounded, and clear, not by avoiding people, but by deciding who you want to be in the middle of the noise. That's the thermostat. That's real power. Most people live on autopilot when it comes to emotion. Someone says something triggering and they lash out. A moment of disrespect happens and they fire back without thinking. That's reaction. It's fast, it's emotional, and it usually leaves behind regret. But between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in that gap is your power. That's where the pause lives. The pause is the space where your better judgment breathes. Reacting is instinctual. It's what happens when your emotions drive before your values have a chance to take the wheel. But responding is intentional. It means you let the moment hit the front door, but you don't immediately invite it in. You take a beat, you check in with yourself, you ask, what does this situation really need from me? Not, what do I feel like doing right now? That's the difference. The pause doesn't have to be long. It could be one deep breath, 1 second of silence, one internal reminder, I'm not going to match their energy, I'm going to lead with mine. That pause rewires the whole situation. Suddenly you're not in a tug of war with someone else's emotions. You've stepped into leadership, you've stepped into control, because no one can lead anything, not a team, not a relationship, not themselves, if they can't pause first. The pause gives your brain time to switch from emotional response to thoughtful action, from fight or flight to clarity. When you react, the conversation becomes about your outburst instead of the original issue. But when you respond, you stay on course. You keep the focus on what matters, not on defending yourself or escalating a conflict that didn't need to exist. People who pause before they speak are not weak. They are the strongest people in the room, because it takes strength to stay calm when everything in you wants to explode. It takes self-control to say, I'm not going there, even when someone's begging you to. It takes clarity to choose silence over sarcasm, curiosity over criticism, understanding over ego. Most people don't pause because they feel like they'll lose ground. Like if they don't react immediately, they'll be seen as passive, soft, or not in control. But it's actually the opposite. The person who can stay calm under pressure is the one who commands the most respect. Not because they shouted the loudest, but because they refused to let chaos pull them out of alignment. Now, you don't need to prove yourself in every moment. You don't need to defend your ego in every interaction. Sometimes the strongest move is no move, just a breath, a moment, a pause. That space is where your wisdom lives. It's where your real power shows up, not in reacting, but in responding. Not in being the loudest voice, but in being the most grounded presence in the room. People don't respect boundaries you never set. They don't honor limits you never communicate. What you tolerate, you train. Every time you stay silent when something crosses the line, you send a message, even if it's unspoken. And that message is, this is okay, even when it's not. That's why boundaries are not just about keeping others in check. They're about showing up for yourself with clarity, with strength, and with consistency. Boundaries are not walls. They don't shut people out, they guide people in, they create structure. They communicate what's okay and what's not, what's respectful and what's harmful. Without them, relationships, whether professional or personal, turn into guessing games, power struggles, or cycles of resentment. And resentment always grows in the absence of clear boundaries. Not because people are intentionally trying to hurt you, but because they don't know where the line is. And if you don't draw it, they won't find it on their own. Setting a boundary doesn't make you rude. It makes you responsible. It's not about controlling others. It's about controlling your environment, your time, your energy. Saying no to someone else is often a yes to your own well-being. And when you avoid setting boundaries to keep the peace, what you're actually doing is creating inner chaos. Because you're betraying your own needs just to avoid temporary discomfort. The most powerful boundaries are calm and consistent. You don't need to yell. You don't need to argue. You just need to be clear. You can say, that doesn't work for me. You can say, I'm not available for that. You can say, if this continues, I'll have to step away. That's not aggression. That's maturity. That's leadership. That's emotional strength in action. When someone pushes your boundaries and you do nothing, you're not keeping the peace. You're delaying the conflict, because eventually that tension builds. It leaks into how you talk to them, how you feel around them, how you show up in other areas of your life. You start walking on eggshells, resenting them for what you allowed. And it's not just about them anymore. It's about the version of yourself that you start to lose in the process. Boundaries are also how you teach people to value your time. If you're always available, always saying yes, always rearranging your life to accommodate others, they'll begin to expect that. Not because they're malicious, but because you train them to. And breaking that pattern starts with one decision: to stop shrinking yourself to keep others comfortable. Not everyone will like your boundaries. Some will push back. Some will question them. Some might even walk away, and that's okay. Because the people meant to be in your life, the people who respect you, won't be threatened by your clarity. They'll adjust. They'll rise to meet the standard you've set. But they can only do that once you decide to set it. In a world addicted to noise, silence is misunderstood. People think if you're quiet, you're powerless. If you don't respond, you've lost. If you don't argue back, you must have nothing to say. But real strength doesn't always speak. Sometimes it pauses. Sometimes it observes. Sometimes it chooses not to engage because the moment doesn't deserve your energy. Silence, when chosen with intention, is not surrender. It's strategy. There's a difference between being silent out of fear and being silent out of strength. One is avoidance, the other is awareness. The strong kind of silence doesn't come from insecurity, it comes from clarity. It comes from knowing who you are and understanding that not every situation deserves a reaction. When you're grounded, you don't need to match chaos with chaos. You don't need to jump into every argument or defend yourself against every criticism. You let your peace speak louder than their volume. People often mistake loudness for power, but volume doesn't equal value. The loudest person in the room isn't always the wisest. They might be the most insecure. They might be trying to convince themselves just as much as they're trying to convince others. But the person who can stay quiet, who can sit in discomfort without rushing to fill the space, that person is anchored. That person holds real presence. They're not afraid of the silence. because they know silence is where truth settles in. Silence gives you space to think before you speak. It gives you time to process before you respond. It protects you from saying things you'll regret. When you rush to reply in a heated moment, you often speak from emotion, not from clarity. But when you choose silence, even briefly, you gain the upper hand, not over others, but over yourself. You regain control of your emotional state, and that's where the real power lives. And you don't have to respond to every provocation. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. Sometimes silence is the boundary. Sometimes it's the message. Sometimes it's the way you let someone know you don't control me. Silence can say, I've already outgrown this conversation. It can say, I know my worth and I don't need to prove it to you. And silence isn't just a response. It's a way to reset, to pull yourself out of the noise and back into your center, to break the cycle of reactivity and step into intention. In that space of stillness, your nervous system calms down, your mind sharpens, your focus returns. You remember what actually matters and what doesn't deserve a place in your mental space. People will try to provoke you, test you, pull you into their storm, but you don't have to go. You don't have to rise to every bait. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay still, listen, breathe, and let the silence say what words never could. People speak from their own lens, shaped by their experiences, insecurities, and emotions. When someone criticizes you, disrespects you, or tries to tear you down, it often has far more to do with what's happening inside them than anything you've done. But when you haven't built that internal clarity, it's easy to take it personally. You start questioning yourself, adjusting your actions, shrinking your voice, all based on someone else's projection. But the truth is, not everything someone says about you is yours to carry. Sometimes people speak from pain. They criticize because they feel inadequate. They attack because they feel powerless. They mock because they fear being seen. And when you internalize those words, you absorb emotions that were never meant for you. You let someone's unhealed wounds shape your self-image. And that's how peace begins to slip away, one comment at a time. When someone judges you unfairly, it's not a verdict. It's a reflection of what they value, what they fear, what they don't understand. You don't need to correct them, prove them wrong, or win them over. You just need to remember, not all feedback is worth processing. Some opinions are noise, not guidance. And learning to tell the difference is emotional maturity. You can't stop people from talking. You can't control how they interpret your actions, but you can choose what you give weight to. You can filter their words through the lens of self-awareness. Does this align with who I know I am? Is there truth here, or is this about them trying to unload something they can't carry? The more you grow, the more you'll notice that people will form opinions that don't match your reality. And that's okay, because the goal is not to be understood by everyone. The goal is to understand yourself so deeply that you're no longer shaken by shallow judgments. People who feel threatened by your growth will try to reduce it. People who envy your peace will try to disrupt it. People who don't understand your boundaries will call them selfish. But all of that is data. It's information about them, not definitions of you. Once you stop taking every word as truth, you start reclaiming your power. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop molding yourself to fit into spaces you've already outgrown. You become free, not because people stop talking, but because their words stop sticking. They bounce off, not because you're numb, but because you're rooted in your values, your intentions, your clarity. And when you're rooted, you don't chase validation. You don't need applause to feel worthy. You know who you are, and that knowing becomes your shield, not against pain, but against confusion, against forgetting your own reflection when someone else throws a distorted one at you. Because it is. Peace isn't a luxury you stumble upon when everything goes right. It's a discipline. It's something you build, maintain, and guard with intention. And once you've tasted real peace, the kind that's quiet, grounded, and internal, you stop letting just anything or anyone disrupt it. You realize not every text needs a reply, not every conversation deserves your presence, and not every invitation is meant for your energy. Peace isn't passive, it's powerful, it takes effort to maintain. It means setting limits with people who drain you, even if they don't understand. It means walking away from situations that feel toxic, even if you're used to them. It means choosing rest over rushing, clarity over chaos, and silence over noise. Not because you're weak, But because you've learned the cost of emotional clutter, protecting your peace means getting selective about what you let into your mind. Not every opinion deserves a home in your head. Not every argument is worth the emotional tax. Some people thrive on conflict. They bait, they provoke, they stir. And when you respond, you feed the cycle. But when you protect your peace, you stop showing up to battles that don't serve you. You stop giving energy to things that rob you of joy and give you nothing in return. Your peace is also protected by your habits, how you start your day, what you consume online, who you let close. It's in the boundaries you enforce and the priorities you defend. It's in the way you talk to yourself when no one's listening. Peace is built in the small decisions. Turning off the phone, saying no without guilt, ease. Stepping outside for fresh air, choosing not to engage when your pride wants to. These aren't dramatic acts, but they add up. They stack into a foundation that can hold you steady. Even when life gets loud, protecting your peace often means disappointing others. It means saying, I'm not available for this. Even when it's uncomfortable, it means not explaining yourself to people who only listen to reply. But every time you choose peace over performance, calm over chaos, you reinforce your values. You remind yourself what matters most. People will test your peace. Some will question your distance. Some will interpret your calm as arrogance or indifference. But protecting your peace isn't about pleasing people. It's about preserving your emotional well-being. You can be kind and still have boundaries. You can be compassionate and still say no. You can be generous and still protect your space. And the more you protect it, the more you begin to thrive. Your thoughts get clearer. Your reactions slow down. Your relationships deepen. Because you're no longer operating from survival, from reactivity, from burnout. You're showing up with a full cup. You're no longer leaking energy into things that never filled you to begin with. And in that state, peace becomes not just something you protect, but something you radiate.